Alrighty, here we go with my lesson plan for Charity's lesson about how to learn a language. So I'm going to start off really quickly with the physical arrangement of the lesson. It's not a very active topic. We're not going to be like walking around very much. So basically I'm going to sit at a table with her. I'll sit on one corner of the table and she'll sit on the other, so that we're still kind of face to face, but we can look at a laptop together and the camera will be able to hit us both. So basically I feel like this order should appeal to Charity, because since she's female, it will give her better eye contact and face-to-face interaction, which generally females of her age enjoy. I'm recording, as I said before, I'm recording everything on one laptop, and then I plan to have another laptop there, or split screening the laptop so that we can do some research, any like last minute research. Like if any like questions should arise that kind of need a bit more explanation, we'll just like pop on there and look it up really quick. Because I have a couple textbooks that talk about the grammar of the languages I'm gonna like introduce her to, but there are other things on the laptop I want to show her as well. So we're going to use that as well. So then I am going to use that proximity with her to be in like a comfortable distance, but not like still not too far away. So that she like kind of can feel really secure in the classroom. I'm also going to ensure that the classroom is as comfortably cool and bright as possible, in order to keep us both alert and not like so drowsy from like the heat that you oftentimes have in classrooms during the winter time. So that's like the physical climate of there. So further on, there's also like the emotional or affective climate of the classroom that kind of plays into that I'm going to be like paying a lot of attention to. I'm going to watch for any cueing that Charity may be giving me, showing her physical state or her affective state, which I know that's not one of the concepts, but in language learning that's really big, the affective state, you know. And so basically I want to be like really careful like looking for that, because in language learning the affective filter is something that can really impede language learning. So I want to make sure that that's not too high, and basically that is brought up by debilitating anxiety. So I'm trying to like eliminate like pretty much all the anxiety of the situation, since she's going to be learning with a new teacher in kind of like a different like environment. Everything's going to be new, so I'm hoping that all of those factors could become like facilitating anxiety for her. I don't believe that she has high trait anxiety, and that this lesson really like I don't think it's going to cause her a lot of state anxiety, because she's really used to these lessons with us. And so yeah, I don't think it should be too hard that way. I'm not really too worried about that. But also to just make sure that she doesn't get any negative cueing from me, I'm gonna be sure to be really enthusiastic, really friendly, and just kind of like be like excited about the topic. As I'm kind of monotone right now, but I'm gonna be really dynamic with her, so that it's a very engaging lesson. Also, like smiling is one of those contagious behaviors that I feel like if a teacher does that, then it's going to help the student be able to feel more comfortable and happy in the circumstance. So I'm going to be doing a lot of smiling. I'm also going to be giving her quite a bit of verbal reinforcement, so that she kind of like can recognize when she's doing really well. And I'm also gonna like point out some of her errors, but in such a way that it still like builds her up, like give her lots of positive feedback. However, I'm going to be really careful to not give so much that it becomes like extinct, like so that we don't get that response back from her of like it really benefiting her in any way. And so also to do that, I'm going to try and use shaping. So when she's like getting close to it, I'll give her that verbal reinforcement. It's like, oh yeah, you're doing really good. That's good. Try it this way now, and kind of like push her towards the desired stimulus. I'm not really a behaviorist, but I feel like that's one of the ways that I do kind of use that stimulus and response kind of aspect of behaviorism. So to be able to really like assess these kinds of things, though, I'm gonna use I'm gonna be running basically right off of intuition. Just my subconscious mind is gonna be assessing all of her cueing, so I'm not really gonna be able to like consciously recognize a lot of things are going on. It's gonna be really instinctual, the way how I'm gonna like just kind of tell what her like emotional state is kind of in relevance to my lesson and that kind of thing. So continuing on with kind of the physical climate or the physical arrangement of the room, I don't really need to do much accommodation of that because Charity doesn't have any handicaps that I'm aware of. So there's not really anything I'd have to do there. A kind of accommodation that I will do as far as the cognitive aspect of this lesson is that I'm going to give her some scaffolding to a lot of the vocabulary that I'm going to use, because there's a lot of technical language, and I'm going to do a pre-assessment to find out what she actually knows, and then kind of go from there to make sure that she understands all that technical language as I use it. So I don't think that that's going to be too big of a problem, though, because she is most likely in the formal operation stage of Piaget's stages of cognitive development. But I need to make sure that she's not forming misconceptions, because if she doesn't know the difference between an adjective and an adverb, I kind of see that in the lesson as she's talking to me about that. I gotta change that. I gotta flesh that out, you know. So I'm going to be looking for those kinds of things, but the main way I'm going to do that is just by asking her questions, making sure that she understands, and like I said before, that pre-assessment that I am going to be implementing in the lesson. In my teaching strategy, I am going to be using a blend of control and information language, so that she can really recognize me more as a guide in her language learning, not so much as a demanding master who's okay, I'll give you this information and you regurgitate it back at me. I kind of want her to recognize that she's learning a technique from me, and she doesn't need me to do that. I'm just kind of her for now guide. I'm going to show her the path, and then she's going to take it up later. So I want her to actually use that attribution of the accomplishment that we reached the night of her lesson to herself. I want her to feel like she actually figured that out, and that I was just kind of her helper, pushing along that. So my teaching is going to be based a lot around questions, and I'm going to help her come up with the answers on her own for the most part. If it's kind of a more abstract idea, I'm just gonna present that to her, hey, this is how it is. This is another tool you can use. But a lot of those things, I'm gonna draw on things that she already knows and connect them back to what I'm teaching her, so that she is making that connection, not me forging it together, not giving her this lump of information and making her brain just figure it out however she wants, forming whatever personal theories she wants. Instead, she's going to actually attribute that to herself. So if that does work, and she starts to feel that like self-efficacy, that feeling that, oh yeah, I can actually do this. I'm good at language, which is really, it's necessary as you start off with the language. Like they need to have that intrinsic motivation that such a feeling can provide, that yeah, language, like learning a foreign language is something I can accomplish. So I'm hoping that by doing this, she's going to get that intrinsic motivation. It's going to bump up her self-efficacy and help improve her self-concept and give her greater self-esteem. It could also even help her reduce her imaginary audience when she participates in her school classes, because she knows that she can do this. Like as she practices on her own, she's going to be more confident in contributing into her high school classes. So because of that, that could also, I'm hoping, cause a chain reaction, and help her promote cooperative learning in class. So as other students recognize that she's good in that subject, she can turn around and help them learn it, and then go in turn and like become a teacher at the same time that she's the student. So, which by doing that would like, and then as her peers like see her as being really good at that, and that self-efficacy rising and her self-concept rising, that would be, as Maslow's hierarchy of needs suggests, that like since all of her more basic needs are filled, it would fill that one of like her self-concept, that esteem, that like it's a little bit different than love, but it's that acceptance of her peers that is one of those needs that is on that hierarchy. It's probably the one that she would be most focused on at that stage, like barring any kind of like, I don't know, proximity to lunch hour, I guess. But anyway, so this would also be appealing to her, like the popularity kind of thing that could give her, and give her extrinsic motivation, so that she would want to be better at the language, so that other people would like her ability as well. I don't really want that to be the main like result from it. The intrinsic motivation is more important to me, but that could be an honest, like helpful bonus that she might get. Since she is most likely in the identity versus role confusion stage of Erikson's psychological stages, I really think that would be something beneficial to her at this stage. Or if you prefer Carol Gillian's ethic of care, then she would either enjoy helping her classmates because it's a kind of self-sacrifice if she's in the conventional stage, or if she's in the pre-conventional stage, she may do so too in order to survive socially. But I honestly think that she's in the conventional stage, and so she'd probably just enjoy helping people. So I think that might be a really beneficial outcome of this lesson, and that's kind of where I want her to be able to go with having this instruction on the basics of learning a language. Just knowing the path ahead of her so that she can go forth and do what she's really trying to accomplish, you know? Like, just kind of know the path ahead so she knows where to tread, you know? So, due to the nature of my subject material, since it pertains primarily to the cognitive domain, I will use mostly expository instruction to convey my point when I'm not but I'm like I said earlier, I'm trying to counterbalance that from it being a teacher-centered instruction, especially since there are only two of us that are going to be there. I'm trying to counterbalance that by doing it through questions. So instead of me just going and presenting the information, I'm going to have her kind of balance that out by her coming up with some of the concepts and then me presenting the rest in an expository way. And since I'm connecting that previous experience with the new experience, that will work with the theory and findings of Jerome Bruner. since he stated that like that's one of the really important things for learning, is that there needs to be that neurological connection between two things. You need to do that myelination between synapses and that kind of thing. Anyway, I'll talk about that later. And I also suppose that the pre-assessment could resemble direct assessment, since I'll be like giving her a question, letting her give me input, but it's really not like that. I don't want it to be that way, since direct assessment, like the teacher is kind of like getting the whole group to work together in this kind of way, but at the same time I'm trying to like direct her down a path, so it's kind of similar, not quite the same thing, but yeah, that part I think would be similar to direct assessment. But I just don't want that much scaffolding. That's my problem with direct assessment, is that it's way too much scaffolding for language learning. So I want her to be able to go outside of that more, not just follow me, but branch out and do what she wants to learn. I really am trying to emulate Albert Banderas's social learning theory, because I want Cherry to be able to observe and imitate my process and the language tools that I use and of other people to be able to improve her language skills. So that's kind of an interesting thing for me, and it especially is interesting because that theory is kind of a mix between constructivism and behaviorism. So that's why I'm trying to like use like some tools from both to be able to convey that on, because it might be able to like help her do that in the long run. So in my actual lesson plan, the way how I want everything to like lay out is basically the objective is that I want Charity to feel confident choosing a language to study in high school. And then as a secondary objective, I want her to have tools which she can use to supplement that learning, even if her teacher isn't that good. So I want to give her like some resources, extra resources, so that she is not even if she doesn't get that great of a teacher, she's going to be able to succeed in language learning if she puts her mind to it. So I have a metaphor for her. I'm going to ask her if she plays an instrument or a sport. I already know that she plays some sports, and that's kind of an interest for her, but I kind of want to get more specific on that, what she's really into. It's like, do you play an instrument or a sport? Now, knowing what you know, what it takes to become a master of that sport or instrument, does it not help you to improve your skills as you try to gain the same skills as a professional? Like basically, by knowing what the professionals do, what abilities they have, isn't it easier to go and practice that specific skill set? So then I want to like relate that back. It's the same way with languages. You grow skill by skill until you reach mastery. And this lesson is a roadmap for that path. So basically I'm going to point out like everything that she's going to need to do to get to that point. I'm expecting that she is probably a novice mid, novice high in like that language ability, probably novice mid in Spanish. And if my understanding is correct, her French and Italian will probably be novice low, basically like a conventional or pre-conventional sort of state. If you go with not the Bloom's taxonomy, but the other taxonomy, I can't remember it. Solo taxonomy, I believe. It's a pre-conventional concept. Anyway, that's not a part of the 100 concepts. But anyway, so I believe that she's at that level, so I'm kind of planning for that kind of knowledge in the grammar that I'm going to expose her to. The kind of scaffolding that I'm going to give her mostly is just in giving definitions and explanations for technical language. But a lot of that she's going to need to learn over time to kind of bring her up to speed, like so that she'll be able to understand Italian and that kind of stuff. I'm going to test her knowledge of the English concepts of basically the parts of speech: noun, verb, adjective, adverb, just to begin with. See if she knows what those are and what an example of each of those would be in English. Then I'm going to ask her to do that in the 3 languages she wants to like explore as possibilities. So Spanish, Italian, and French. So I will have examples thought up that could be interesting, cognates, false cognates, that kind of thing that we can like explore more deeply. But basically, what I wanted to say about the pre-assessment is that I'm going to have those examples, and I want to see how much of that language is in her schema. So we have 3 different language schemas that we're testing in this one exam, or this pre-assessment. So we're going to see if she has any interesting personal theories about those 2 as well. See if there are any misconceptions, overgeneralizations, undergeneralizations as far as the categories of those parts of speech are concerned. If she does have any deep-set misconceptions, providing her new examples may cause some disequilibrium, but I believe that we can remedy that by just like discussing the terms and like figuring out why things are the way that they are. So then she'll be able to assimilate the new information into her schema and pop right back into equilibrium. Also, in the pre-assessment, we're going to be working with some defining characteristics of certain parts of speech and some correlational characteristics between these 3 Romance languages. So basically, like, I'm going to show her some different ways that, like some things that are distinctive in each language, and then some things that kind of like they branch off of each other because they're all derivatives of Latin. And then maybe also some positive and negative examples of that as well. Or here, I wrote it down. I will provide a few examples for each answer as a prototype, as well as some positive instances of false cognates and possible negative transfer errors in the grammar section. So that's like the lower down in this part, and that's where the pre-assessment is going to be. Those could also be considered negative instances, however, just in defining that term, because they are also examples of improper language usage. So it's a positive example of this bad behavior. So if you're talking about proper language, they're negative instances of proper language. If Charity gives me some learned helplessness during this pre-assessment, I'm just going to ask her to do her best and to write anything that she can think of. The assessment's going to help her work on the applying stage of Bloom's taxonomy. So I believe she already has information in her schema. I just want her to take that knowledge that she has and then go and apply it into those categories, as I said. So she's identifying it, and now she's applying it in a different context than she probably learned it. And then eventually we're going to work on applying that into other situations. So maybe we'll have her make some sentences and that kind of stuff if she's ready for it. But I need to see where she's at before I can take her that far. But my goal is to get her to the applying stage of those different parts of the taxon or of the language. So as I'm teaching the material, I'm gonna first off start by asking her what her motivation for learning the new language is. I want her to like visualize herself using the foreign language in either of her career possibilities that she talked about. She talked about interior design and physical therapy, and all 3 of these languages would be really beneficial in those categories. I'm going to give her some benefits that being bilingual can have, like how it helps you perform better in school. It helps with your problem-solving skills. There are also like more opportunities for jobs and that kind of thing. And I'm just going to list off a couple of those situations that she might find it in. So I'll skip that. I'll also mention that learning a foreign language is a good way to read great literature, come into like great arts and that kind of stuff that are like made in that new language. So she can like get into like Les Miserables like way more deeply than she would if she didn't know French, if that's the language she chooses. So I'm going to bring up that kind of stuff and give her some other examples in the other languages that could really benefit her if she really knew something outside of the translated version. So that's something special. Then moving on, I'm going to move on to the grammar part. And at the beginning of this section, I'm going to give her the pre-assessment. So we're going to have that introduction section and then the pre-assessment. Just so that she's like, it's not like, oh, we're going to start off with a test, you know. So after she's done that, I'm going to explain to her the difference between inductive and deductive learning. That it's a strategy that different teachers use, as I mentioned to you, Brother Wilson, in class. And as you pointed out, this would have lots of positive transfer into many other fields of study. So I'm really excited to teach her this because it's probably going to be one of the big takeaways from my lesson that could occur in other situations. And going back into the possible applications stage that I was talking about in the last section, that is where I'm hoping for a lot of the social development in this lesson to happen. Because if she really understands that learning a language, it has more application outside of just school, then she's really gonna it's gonna help her branch out socially, not only with her community but to worldwide cultures, and that not just Charity's world will become more globalized and more enriched because of that. So anyway, I'm going to talk about the inductive and deductive section. Then I'm going to do the understanding of grammar terms. I'm going to make sure that she understands that that's an important stage of learning a new language. You got to know what's what in order to be able to use it right. As you learn a new word, you need to know what part of speech it is. If you use it as a verb, if it's an action of some sort, or if it's a noun, and understand that different languages have different kinds of words or different tenses or moods. So just understanding that that's something that she's going to have to learn eventually. So in thinking ahead on this, I believe that she probably has an overgeneralization with Spanish adjectives, thinking that they always follow the noun that they modify, which isn't the case, but it's kind of a complicated topic. So I'm not really going to get into this unless she seems like she's ready for it. I'm going to probe to see if it is in her zonal proximal development, as Vygotsky would put it. I would also look out for any undergeneralizations in that category, so that she has all of that grammar straight to start off with. However, due to my time limitations, I'm not going to be able to sit and stay on one subject until she's mastered it. So I can't really do mastery learning in this case, even though I'd prefer her to really get something down before we move on to something else. I'm going to have to keep it close on time. So I'm going to correct any big errors that she may have or big misconceptions, but less malignant errors and misconceptions I'm going to have to leave to be worked out later. So I'm going to use my discretion that way. And then after she, another really important section that we're going to talk about is learning fixed phrases, because it doesn't work with grammar rules because they're something that's very cultural, very deep set into the language. And so idiomatic phrases and that kind of stuff, I'm going to give her some in each language so that she can understand how weird it sounds to us if you just translate it literally. But if you learn it as a chunk, then you're gonna be okay. So, and especially with this category and with the grammar terms and that kind of stuff, I'm gonna introduce her to the idea of using mnemonic devices with it. My favorite one is sound associations. I like to just kind of see what they kind of sound like to me, and then make an idea with that. I have lots in Spanish. I just can't think of any right now, but I'm going to come up with a few for the lesson that I'm going to share with her. so that she can remember those things. They may not be in her zone of proximal development yet because they're complex ideas. Most of them are really abstract, but I'm going to give her that tool that she knows that she can use. I'm going to point out to her that in languages, I'm going to teach her the concept of false cognates, so that she understands that in languages there are words that sound similar, but their meaning, their original referent, has changed since they both were like used in the two languages, and that division in language has created different meanings in the end. And so because of this, that can create a negative transfer error, and is also a type of interference that your language, your L1, is combating you and fighting you as you're trying to use your L2, because that's the original pre-programmed mental equation for language. So it's kind of hard to beat that, and I'm gonna help her figure out that she needs to look out for those, especially with Spanish. The other languages too, and French as well. French has quite a few, but Spanish especially. And then finally in this grammar section, I'm going to talk to her about improving her accent and how that's a really important part of learning language. There are people in India who speak English really, really well. Their grammar is fantastic, but you talk to them, those telemarketers or those kind of people, you talk to them on the phone and you can't understand a word they say because their accent is so different. So I'm going to work with her on that one, and it's really interesting because that is the one part of language that is really key in the psychomotor domain. So I'm going to help her understand that she's going to actually, as she's learning a language, she's going to have to teach her mouth and her entire vocal tract to just rewire itself to do this other language. So you just pop into that accent. And just kind of teach her some tricks with that, because I like acting, and accents is a really fun part of that. So she kind of has some tricks with that and kind of starts associating it that way. She's going to be a lot better at that as she goes into learning a language. If she starts with her accent right off the bat, it's going to avoid a lot of fossilization. So I'm going to work on that. The third section of the lesson is about improving the 4 main skills of language. So I'm going to do this with asking questions like, oh yeah, what do you think the main skills in languages are? Or in other words, what are the big mile markers when young children are learning a language? So those big mile markers, I'm going to give her some scaffolding on that in case she doesn't really think along the same way. But the biggest ones are speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And for us, we don't really pay that much attention to listening because everybody pops in there, but that could also be counted as understanding. But in this section, I'm basically just going to give her some ideas for how she can work on that, and at the end of the lesson, I'm going to give her some electronic tools, and I'll talk about in a little bit that will help her do this. But I'm going to share with her those 4 main skills that you need to work on to master a language, so that she knows the parameters of a language, what it really encompasses. And then the fourth section of the language is cultural exposure. So does your culture affect the way you speak? I'm going to pop her a really big question that should cause some metacognition, do other English speakers say things differently than you do? What are examples you can think of? So there are people from other cultures in our own country who speak our own language, and other English speakers in other countries, and they say things different because they have different cultures. We as Mormons have very specific lingo, I guess, that we use that is very specific to our religious culture. And so I'm going to get her thinking about that, and then realize that a foreign language is centuries upon centuries upon centuries of that exact same thing. And so as you're learning the language, you got to learn those things too. So I'm going to talk about things like high or low emotional expressivity, the way how culture just basically says what you're allowed to say, because you could translate something perfectly into another language, but it might not be contextually appropriate. Like, I don't know, there's just a lot of things. Like, it's okay in Spanish to call somebody fat, but we'd never do that. And it would really offend you if somebody did that to you, if you didn't know that. So I'm going to show that as an example. I'll also talk about how the way we speak reflects the way we view the world, and how ideas such as fatalism versus like our free will kind of idea that like Americans and Western culture have really also affects language. There are a lot of aspects of language that reflect that, and you have to learn to use those and learn them to be able to actually like understand people who do use those different, mostly idiomatic expressions, but sometimes they're not so idiomatic still. Also, like different things like the Italian culture, how it's family centered rather than like patriotism. Just kind of fun things that the way how people try and convey their connotation, their general overarching, hey, I'm a good guy kind of thing, it's really reflected in the kind of language they use. So I'm going to point out to her that as she becomes more and more skilled in these languages, that she can look into those things and learn how to manipulate her words even better. Finally, as the fifth section, I'm going to talk to her about avoiding language loss, because after she's gotten so much language learned in her high school class, she's going to need to keep that up to avoid decay, because decay is like a really big problem in language, because but there are like other things. There can also be like a failure to store, because that's kind of like a failure to retrieve kind of situation. But the failure to store can happen a lot in language when that affective filter comes down. It pops in with when debilitating anxiety comes on, and then it's a barrier that just keeps the working memory from like storing things in long-term memory. The sensory register may take in the information and transmit it to the working memory, but that may not store the information in the long-term memory, or it can only do so partially. So it just may not like make that full connection. It might just like make a partial one. So, and then that can also, like, all of that is like has to do with the simplified memory system. But just that one little affective filter can break up that whole process, and it's kind of tough. So, for an example to teach her decay, to tie it back into something that she already knows, I'm going to ask her, if you stop playing your sport, what will happen? It's the same with language. If you do forget even if you do forget lots of your new language, though, it will still be easier the second time that you learn it than you did the first time. So like just like how we have muscle memory, and if you don't do that, your muscles are going to decay. Even so, our brain's memory can decay, but still they're like subconscious traces of it, and as soon as you start working on that, it'll come back. So just giving her that hope that even if she doesn't like go and study this language in college as well, and years later wants to pick it back up, it's going to be easier for her to do that. She shouldn't give up on it even if she doesn't keep up on these things. But my tips for her are that she should always keep practicing and learning. The longer and more frequent her practice is, it causes myelination, and it will result in faster retrieval. But that requires lots of self-regulation, because it really requires lots of practice. I'm probably going to mention Elder Anderson at this point, because Elder Anderson is a really good example of a guy who's really busy, but still he was very, 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 very dedicated to language learning. And 1 in 3 languages, actually almost the 3. He learned Portuguese, not Italian, but some of the exact same 3 that we're studying. I'm also going to help her. I'm going to suggest that she works to automate a lot of her skills over time. The more that she uses it, the more natural it'll become. So her goal isn't to memorize words, and this is really important. It's not to memorize words, it's to make your new language habitual. So I'm just going to help her understand that she's trying to form a habit, not memorize information. So as she goes and uses this class, she shouldn't focus on just memorizing things for the class. She needs to get used to using them in context. So context is so important. So finally, like I said, I'm going to give her a couple of tools that she can use to go and promote some discovery learning on her own. So the first of which is really interesting. It's the program Mango. And that is free for those of us who are here at BYUI. So I assume that with your status as a teacher at BYUI, you'd also have access to this through McKay Library. I'm going to show her where it is, and then probably in class tomorrow, I'm going to check up with you and see if you have access to that as well. If so, your daughter might be pestering you to use that program. Hope you don't mind that. But it's really good because it is really good at, it could be used as a program to facilitate her in-class experience. And before she even chooses one, she could work on this program and study all 3 languages and see which one she really actually feels closest to, which one she likes the most. Because she might really just hate certain aspects of the language, and that could be a total buzzkill for her, and she could waste a whole year of schooling if she doesn't get that experience. So I want to suggest her to use that one, or Duolingo, which is a nice, easy, friendly app on your phone. I've heard it's even made by a member. But the difference between the two is that Mango has a bit more cultural influence in it. It just kind of is better to convey like that aspect of it, so they know why they're using things in a certain way, and learning more of the connotation behind words rather than just the language, like word for word transmission of something, you know. So finally, I will also present my moral dilemma to Charity. I haven't determined exactly at what point I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to do that in the first section to help promote that like hot cognition that she may have. Like that was one thing. Oh, I forgot to mention that actually. As she's talking about that, like there was one that was talking about refugees. There are lots of refugees that speak French, especially, and also Spanish, in our country. And talking about refugees might cause some hot cognition, and that could be a great motivator for her to change people's lives and cause that social development and that moral development that I want her to get. But I'm going to use that. I put this at the bottom of my lesson plan, but I want to use it higher up there. I'm going to present that moral dilemma to her about if places like Chinatown and Koreatown and that kind of stuff should actually be allowed to be formed, and why. Because like I'm going to go in more detail about it with her, but I want to be able to assess her stage of moral development according to Kohlberg, because that could be really important, like to figure out what stage she's actually at. Because if she's wanting to change the whole world, if I'm ranting about that for a long time, it may get a little boring. But if I help her like get to that stage of development, you know, as far as language learning is concerned, then that could be a really big like takeaway from this lesson. So that's going to be part of my formative assessment to kind of see, it's part of my pre-assessment, I guess, a little bit too, but it's kind of to see if she's getting there, what stage she's at, because I'm not her only teacher in this. I know that you guys have been helping her understand cultural diversity, and your example of how she called those girls Mexicans in her basketball, or like her PE class, that really shows to me that she could use a little bit more globalization of these kinds of things. And then as a final assessment, I'm basically just going to ask her how she's feeling about it, if she feels confident in it, and any doubts that she has. If she still has doubts, we can flesh those out. And if she doesn't, if she feels really confident and says, yeah, I can like really just feel that she's feeling that way, then she's benefited from the lesson and she doesn't need any more. So one last little section to kind of show you the rest of the concepts that I haven't used in here. Like I wanted to talk about what is going to be going on in her brain. I'll just read this to you. Charity's neocortex and parietal lobe will be very active as she thinks about and uses speech. Her brainstem will be controlling her breathing and other automated functions. The different parts of her cerebrum will be active as well. The cerebrum will not be very active, or cerebellum. Okay, so the cerebrum is like the overall part, and then the different sections are like the cerebellum. And they will not be very active since there are not many physical skills that will be taught in my lesson. Just a little bit of accent, but we're not going to go in that very much. Like the phonetics isn't that big of a part of this lesson. Her frontal lobe will be active as she makes and works on fulfilling her goals and moral obligations. So if she feels like it's her moral duty, or if she has a goal to learn a language and that kind of stuff, this section is going to be really like active. Her temporal lobe will give sense to the auditory input from my speech. Her occipital lobe and parietal lobe will do the same for her visual input from her eyes in different parts, but yeah. Anyway, her motor cortex will be working hard to learn the strategies that I teach her. Her limbic system and hippocampus will also be active, processing her emotions, but the limbic system will also be working to store memories and learn skills. The thalamus will help relay the information to different parts of the brain, and the hypothalamus to the nervous system. Hopefully, Charity's amygdala won't be active so that debilitating anxiety won't be present. Again, I want that that affective filter really low. And now, all that I have previously mentioned will be conveyed by the neurons through its parts: the dendrite, axon, synapses, and the myelin, and the neurotransmitters. In addition to that, the glial cells will also help the process of storing information by regulating the synapses. Since Charity is very young, her brain will have lots of plasticity and will be in prime condition to learn a new language. And I'm really hoping that this lesson helps start a chain reaction so that she can start myelinating those connections in her brain from reference, the idea of different concepts in her mind, and the speech, the words that are associated with them. So that's one of my big goals, is that she learns to do that. I did not include descriptive research, correlational research, experimental research in this lesson because all of those were used to find the information that I'm teaching her, but I don't know those specific studies. I don't know exactly where all of it came from what, and it's above my pay grade. But I know that each of those, like descriptive research, is like observational. It's an in-depth study of an individual group or individuals, so it's like a case study kind of thing. Correlational research. So you're basically changing two variables to try and see if there's a correlation between them. And the experimental research, where you have like your control group and the variable that you're changing to figure out if that one variable like will affect it. There are lots of different things in language that have used that, but it's not really applicable to my lesson. I didn't include personal fable because I don't think that Charity is that young. I think that she won't have any personal fables. I didn't include Howard Gardner and his 8 intelligences because my lesson isn't really going to be it. I can't get far enough into this language to really be able to play with the different intelligences. It's mostly just going to be like group work and the auditory, visual, those kinds of intelligences that I'll be working on with her. But I won't be touching kinesthetic, really, and that kind of stuff, which it might be beneficial to her, but the content I have just really doesn't have a way to convey it that way without it seeming like a little bit primary, you know. So I avoided like specializing it in on that, because as she gets into the language learning, she's going to find more of that. It's not an actual language lesson so much as language theory to learn languages, to build that process. So I avoided that aspect of it. And then Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats and parallel thinking. I didn't include that because I just felt like it would be too lengthy of a process for this lesson, you know, like really it's not that, we won't have enough time to be able to go through all that and get in parallel as we think about how to solve these problems. But I recognize how that tool works. And then finally, norm versus criterion reference test. I'm not going to be giving her any standardized tests in here or anything of that sort, of that significance. And in high school, she's not going to have to take an OPI or a Praxis. So this really isn't relevant to this class. And I don't have this lesson, and I don't have other students that are going to be taking this, so I wouldn't be comparing her with anybody else. Perhaps I'm doing kind of a norm referenced test because I'm comparing her with a hypothetical student, but I really don't think that it's that applicable in this situation. So that's pretty much it. That's my lesson. I hope you like it, and I am excited to teach Charity. I think this is going to be a great lesson to help her out with, and I really want it to be a success. So I'm going to do my very best to make it something really impressive for her. So I'll see you in class, and hope you have a great one.